see you all here, and welcome to Bank Street. My name is Cecilia Traw, Dean of the Bank Street Graduate School of Education. And thank you for being here this evening for this important discussion on the success strategies of women of color who have important leadership roles. I want to thank BASCA, the Alumni Association, and especially the BASCA board, board member Rabeen Nickens, for inspiring and leading this panel. Thank you for our fine... Thank you also to our fine alumni panelists who have offered their time to share their experiences. And in the audience, I know we have many additional outstanding leaders, several of whom are willing to share their experience and strategies with you at future alumni events. This evening's program is significant to the graduate school and the college, not only because it offers alumni and students important career guidance, but also because the current work of BASCA so closely complements the work on race and social justice that we are doing in the graduate school and throughout the college. BASCA launched a social justice committee in 2017. The committee meets frequently and hosted its first event in March 2018. Their discussions continue, and a new event is in the planning stages for the coming spring semester. Now let me say just a little bit about Rabeen. There's a lovely full introduction of her work in your program. What I want to do is just underline her educational experience. She's a proud graduate, 2003, of Bank Street College of Education, where she earned an MS Ed degree in early childhood and elementary ed. She also holds an M.Ed. in organizational leadership from Columbia University's Teacher College, and studied dramatic arts at the new Federal Theater workshops with master thespians such as Ruby Dee and the founder of the National Black Theater, Dr. Barbara Ann Tier. So I turn the evening now over to you, Rabeen.
Thank you so much. This is the most beautiful audience I've seen in a long time. Thank you for just looking so good. Thank you so much. So, as Cecilia said, this is really something that's inspired by the success of women of color, particularly Black, African-American, Afro-Latino women that are graduates of Bank Street College. But it's also an opportunity for us to celebrate what's going right. You know, a lot of times what we see in the media is everything that's going wrong, all these statistics and things of that nature. And what we want to do tonight is be a positive motivation for everybody in the office and in the audience, and actually start a dialogue as well. But just to give you a little background about what really inspired this panel discussion, about 2 years ago, a colleague of mine, Principal Carlin Washington, who I think is somewhere in the audience somewhere, yes, over there, we both co-authored some research that was published in an international project called Racially and Ethnically Diverse Women Leading Education. And what the editors of that work, Toni Moore and Terry Watson out of City College, Toni Moore out of Cal State Dominguez Hills, what they wanted to do is to provide an opportunity for male and female scholars to work together, which is rare in regards to education leadership. And so they got people from all over the world to talk about, in each chapter, some aspect of education. But one thing that Carlin runs a middle school in Manhattan in District 3, and I'm an educational administrator with the Department of Ed. One of the things that we noticed is that there was a lot of research that had to do with Black women in leadership when it came to corporate America, or the governmental sector, or when it came to education, higher ed leadership, right? But very little scholarly research in regards to K-12 school leaders. So we set out to find out a little bit more. And whereas the prior research said that a lot of Black women were having difficulty being their authentic selves, having all of these challenges and even psychosomatic illnesses when it came to having to switch from being, one way on the job, alter the way that they were in order to succeed. When we actually brought together these Black female school leaders, we found out something totally different. And it was incredibly inspiring how they faced some of the same challenges and more, but had very different and unique ways of handling that. So today we wanted to actually open it up and make these women come alive. None of these women were actually involved in that original research, but we thought we would bring to you the success stories live here in Bank Street for you to see exactly what are Black women doing in order to not just survive and deal with some of the microaggressions or some of the systematic oppression that sometimes comes within organizations, but what are they doing to thrive? But before we get into our wonderful, wonderful panelists, for those of you who haven't read the research, I wanted to give you some context through this slideshow. So I just want to give you some time to just take a look at some of the information here, some of the story and the background, and just to see whether or not that resonates with you in any way, because this will be a grounding for us to begin the discussion, and we definitely want to hear from you towards the end of our panel. Thank you.
And all of this used to really get to me. Back in those days, I had a lot of sleepless nights worrying about what people thought of me, wondering if I might be hurting my husband's chances of winning his election, fearing how my girls would feel if they found out what some people were saying about their mom. But eventually, I realized that if I wanted to keep my sanity and not let others define me, there was only one thing I could do, and that was to have faith in God's plan for me. I had to ignore all of the noise and be true to myself, and the rest would work itself out. So throughout this journey, I have learned to block everything out and focus on my truth. I had to answer some basic questions for myself. Who am I? No, really, who am I? What do I care about?
And the answers to those questions have resulted in the woman who stands before you today. Thank you so much. So I have a question. How many people in the audience, by a show of hands, connected to anything that you saw there in that video in any way, shape, or form? Okay. And I just want to point out that these are not all women of color whose hands have gone up, and these are not all women whose hands have gone up, which is interesting. How many of you are currently in school leadership? Okay, so that's about a third of the audience. How many of you are in education leadership but as admin, either in a central or district office or a network or something, and probably that's the other third? How many of you are in leadership or aspiring to leadership in some field or sector outside of education? Okay, so that's probably the other third. So everybody here in some way, shape, or form has connected to that. But one of the things that we found in the research is that despite the fact that a lot of women of color, particularly in the corporate and governmental fields, are dealing with these challenges, there's something about women in education leadership that has made it so that they've developed these strategies to succeed despite all. So that's what we want to get to today, and we want to hear their stories as well as your stories as well. So I'm going to just do a brief introduction just by title of some of our panelists, and then I'm going to hand it over to them. When I say your name, if you can just raise your hand. We have Miaja Edwards, class of '08, who is currently a teacher development and effectiveness coach, or TDEC, for those of us in the system, in the Superintendent's Office of District 5. We have Deborah Jeffries-Glass, who is the lower school assistant principal and the director of associate and student teacher programs at Little Red Schoolhouse and Elizabeth Irwin High School. We also have Asia Johnson, who is currently the principal of Longwood Preparatory Academy in the South Bronx. We have Tracy Benjamin Van Lira, who is the program director and director of training for the Special Education Leadership Fellowship Program, or SELF. And last but not least, we have Gloria Rosario Wallace, who is a senior director in the Office of Equity and Access in the Division of School Climate and Wellness for the Department of Ed. Okay, I know, right? The hot pedagogical leadership fire here. Exactly. What do you think this was? Okay? Yes, okay? And it was very important for us to have a cross-section between traditional public, charter, as well as independent schools, because we're all in this together, okay? We're all in this together. But having said that, I have a question for the panel, and we can just start in order. Just to get to know you, just in 3 minutes, how did you get here? How did you get to this place? What was it that even led you to pursue leadership, and what were the moves that got you there? And I'm going to join you.
So Michelle Obama posed a question, who am I? And so I attended Talented and Gifted Elementary School in Harlem, New York. And thereafter I was afforded the opportunity to attend Riverdale Country School, which is an affluent private school in Riverdale here in the Bronx, where the students looked nothing like me. And for me, it was an incredible culture shock. And I experienced a tremendous amount of discrimination. I had a very difficult time. But not only because of the racial disparities or the implicit biases that people thought or held, the misconceptions about me, but also because I had an incredibly difficult time competing academically. And what I realized was that you can be from Harlem, New York, and attend the best school But because of the lack of academic rigor for our scholars in terms of exposure, you still may not be able to compete with your affluent peers. And so that is my why. I became a leader to ensure that I closed the gap and to create a school of academic excellence where all scholars can excel, particularly scholars who look like me, so that they can thrive and know that they can become whoever they want to be. They can self-actualize in whichever way that they can. And so I was able to found a school in Maspeth, New York, which again, someone said, So I see that Maspeth, New York actually was a similar Riverdale experience for me. My initial goal was to be in Harlem, which is where I'm from. However, at the time, there were only charter schools opening in Harlem, and I decided I wanted to go the traditional district route. And when I first wanted to recruit for Maspeth, I had 4 parents come to me on my first day, the first 4 of 6 parents with whom I met, who said to me, I would never send my child here because you do not look like my prototypical leader. And I had to have an inquiry approach, and I said, well, how does that person look? And they said, a white male. As you can even hear it in my voice, how emotional it makes me to this day. To know that you can be amazing at what you do. My school ended up being one of the top performing schools in the district, outperforming all of our peer groups. And thereafter, when my founding scholars matriculated, I decided to take my skill set to Harlem, New York, which is where I'm from, and take over a renewal school, which I turned around, and now I work at the district level in that capacity, supporting principals. And so I'm excited to share our journey, and similar to what we saw in the video. It's not others' perception of us, it's who we decide we are and what we decide to do with our time, talents, and efforts. So continue the journey with us. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. So what brought me here today is what has brought me to every stage of my life is my ancestors. So I come from a legacy of folks who do the work without the title. Right? So, right or wrong, that's how I was raised. And it wasn't until I had met a mentor who became my mentor principal who identified me as a leader. Because folks would see me as someone who can get the job done, but no one had ever talked to me about getting my leadership degree until I met another brown woman who saw that in me. So if she hadn't pushed me into that assistant principal role, I probably would still be very happy teaching in my classroom. But that awareness that if you're sitting and waiting for someone to tap you, then you might be sitting and waiting for a long time, is something I'm glad I got earlier rather than later. And in terms of, so my journey from being a classroom teacher to founding a school, an alternative high school in District 15 in Brooklyn, to now working in my first role in the central office in a really public way of looking at equity, looking at racial equity, and helping school districts grapple with that has been really, really interesting. But I have to every day recognize the power and strength of my ancestors who literally got me to this continent, whether they chose to be here or not, we're here. And then what am I going to do with the life that I have before me? And then looking at the people who surround me, who every day are like, oh, I think you might be questioning yourself too much. I think you might not be realizing that you have already kind of figured that out, right? And like changing the power of language to go from I'm not sure, I don't know, to yes, I do, right? I know what I'm doing a little bit, and let me try it, right? So thank you.
How did I get here? Circumstances, the mysteries of life that we end up where we are in the moments that we're there and the directions that takes us. I started out I worked in the film business for quite some time, like 15 years as a production manager and a production coordinator. And what that meant is that I capitalized on the skill set that I had, which is I could make trains run on time. I could use my relational skills to tell people no, that they couldn't spend money that wasn't mine, and that takes a certain skill. I had to figure out how to get folks the tools that they needed to do their best work. And eventually I realized that my husband and I were both in the film business and it didn't make sense for both of us to do that, and I was always interested in going back and finishing my bachelor's degree. So at a certain age, somebody went back to school and got her bachelor's degree. And while I was there, my sister-in-law, who ran a Head Start program in upstate New York, would always be whispering in my ear, "You have a skill set. You should be in education. You're so great with your kids. I've seen you with other kids." And, you know, when people tell you something that you haven't figured out for yourself, you have to figure it out for yourself before it becomes truly real for you. And that happened for me. The confidence that she had that what I was able to do for all those years successfully in one avenue could support students in another avenue. So that's sort of how I ended up in education. When I started taking education courses in undergraduate, I realized this is important. This is where I can really utilize my skills. And I also realized that because I was, where I lived was in a district District 1 in Manhattan, which had a number of different schools, and there was a huge disparity. And I did some research around that particular district, and I was like, yeah, I'm going back to school. And when I told my sister-in-law that I was going to go to college for education, she had a very sort of calm face. But after I left the room, apparently she was like, I knew it, I knew it, I knew it. So here I am. Ended up coming here to Bank Street to get my degree in early childhood and elementary ed, and then went on to study leadership through the Klingenstein Center at Teachers College. My story is still being written. I'm in independent schools because there are students that look like me, that look like us, who need leaders that look like them. And we have a lot of work to do, and I'm in it for the long haul. So, thank you.
Hi, everyone. I think the reason why or how I got here really started with an injustice. When I first moved to New York about 11 years ago, I worked in a charter school, and I was constantly asked to refer students for special education services. And as you can guess, the majority of those students were African American boys. And I said, this just can't be right. All of these students can't have a disability. It just doesn't make any sense. And so I decided that I was going to take a leap of faith and apply for a job with the Department of Education to work as a director of special education programs. What I didn't realize was that that also meant that I had to go work on Rikers. And it also insecure detention to help build or clear up a lawsuit because the Department of Education at that time did not know how to service students with disabilities in a transient setting. And so my job there was really difficult and challenging because all everyone wanted to do was just get it right. No one wanted to understand how to support students, which was predominantly African American and Latino boys and girls who had not been served well by our public school system in quite a long time, and everyone just wanted to know, how can we fix it? And it wasn't about fixing it, it was about how to sustain a practice that is not going to allow this injustice and this disproportionate number of students being represented in special education. And so from there, once the lawsuits were finished, and there was nothing else to do, I then went back to that same charter school. Actually was asked to come back to that same charter school. I thought I'd give it a chance because they had an opening for a principal position, and I want to say within 3 months I was like, I gotta get out of here, I gotta go back to the DOE. And so I did. I applied, unbeknownst to me, to a renewal. I knew it was a renewal school. I had no idea what renewal was because I was working in a charter school, and like, if anyone knows about charter schools, like you're in a charter school land, like you just kind of make it all up. And it's like things that are like really real. You're like, oh, we never did that in charter school. But in the DOE, and I applied for this position in the renewal school, and I knew very little. I was so desperate to get out that I later found out that the school, what I read after I accepted the position, this is literally how desperate I was. I did not know the name of the school. I only knew the location of the school. I knew it was in the South Bronx. And then my superintendent said, you have this job, I want to offer you this job. Now I'll tell you the name of the school. And then he said, then I want you to Google the school. And I Googled the school to find out that the principal had been shot with a BB gun, doused with pepper spray, 2 different principals. And I said, yeah, I'm up for the challenge. I'll take it. And so I accepted this position, and it has been 4 years since I took over 4 school years, 2 annual years, but 4 school years. This is my 4th school year at that school. It has been the most rewarding and fulfilling thing that I have ever done in my life. How it has become for leadership, I thank Bank Street for everything that I've learned, because I've been able to take all of the bad things that I didn't do at the charter school and actually legally apply them to my work in the DOE. But it helped me because one thing that I did notice, but there wasn't a lot of people like me. And so I was offered and asked to join when Carmen Farina was still in office, to join the city's diversity advisory group, to start looking a little bit closer at the equity in our schools. And I think everyone's notion at the time, and as it has grown and developed, has been, let's just put some black kids in some white schools. And it's like, we gotta really look really closely at the subgroups, right? What I think we're doing in the city is we're creating some schools that are low performing by these screens that are happening anywhere from middle school to high school. And so if we want to change, it can't just be, let's put some black kids in some predominantly white schools. So let's look at our subgroups. Let's look at who we're sending. If this kid can't get into a screen school, they're going to go to a non-screen school, and all of the non-screen schools are filled with students who didn't pass an interview or didn't have 3s and 4s on the exam, thus creating low-performing renewal schools. So some of my work has been around looking at our work in the city really closely, looking at who's making the decisions and how we can support one another to make sure that not just our school system, the largest in the city, is probably the most segregated in the city. I know that's a part of your work. But then also about what does that look like for me in representation in my school, and how can we make our work culturally relevant to the students that we serve. And so as she mentioned, that my story is not, I think I probably have like 2 words on the page at this point, but I really have a lot more to go.
So how did I get here in 3 minutes or less? So I want to be very clear that I am thriving, and I arrived at this place because of my parents, who are in the audience right now. So I publicly want to say to my mother and father, I want to publicly say to you thank you, because when you asked how did you get here, it is because of those 2 individuals, amongst many more in my village, but I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge them. 3 of the lessons that I learned very early on, and my mother was very adamant about: know who you are. From a little girl, I've always known, and there were some developments that came with that, but she was very clear with me about knowing who I am. She called me on my stuff and would say, it can't always be everybody else. If you were the common denominator, it can't always be everybody else. And my village, who, as you mentioned earlier, Rabin, this is about celebrating. My village celebrates me. They call me on my stuff when they need to, but they celebrate me. I am very fortunate that I was able to attend one of the top school districts in New York City, and I believe it's remained so, District 26, if anybody is familiar with District 26. And so I was a student in 1979, starting in the 3rd grade, and I was always the other, but I never felt like I was the other. And my teachers, my family never made me feel like I was the other. And so fast forward to going into corporate America, where I worked in marketing for about 8 years. And I remember an experience where I kept being assigned the Black clients. And so B. Smith was one of the clients that I was assigned. And I said to my supervisor, because I never felt like, well, why aren't I getting other clients? So I said, are you giving me all Black clients? What's up with that? And it was, I was being my authentic self, and we had a conversation about that. That was a little bit uncomfortable for my supervisor at the time, but we moved forward. And so I felt like I had to not just hold myself accountable for not being okay with this, but I had to hold my supervisor accountable as well. So fast forward, I receive a phone call from a headhunter saying, your resume ended up on my desk. There is a college that is looking for a marketing director for their territory. And I was like, all right, I'll try and get my interview skills, see how sharp they are. I go in for the interview, I'm offered the position. My job is to go around to high schools and market to college. And so I end up, one of my first presentations was at A. Philip Randolph High School. And I was then, the principal happened to see it, and she asked me if I'd ever heard of a program called the New York City Teaching Fellows. And I'm like, teaching? I didn't know, no. And she said, I see your relationship with the students. I think this is something that you should look into. I applied, I was accepted, and 15 years later, I have been in the DOE, I've been in Newark, and I'm now in New Orleans, go figure. I did not think that at 46 that I would decide to pick up my family and go to the South. And New Orleans is the South for real, you guys. For real. But I go back to where I started from at the beginning of this, my introduction. I'm thriving and I'm happy. And that's how I ended up where I am today.
So one of the things, and let me also just remind people that there are question cards going around. So we'll wrap up, yes, so please do hand those in over there to our handy dandy question card, lovely lady. And we'll be engaging with you all. And then afterwards, there's also a networking event, so please do stick around after the panel is completed to get to know these ladies and get to know the power in the audience as well. One of the things that I noticed, and I think maybe the audience might have noticed as well, is that part of your journey was always, you convincing yourself or somebody convincing you that you could do this, and you accomplish these things. And, in terms of getting your leadership role, it makes me think about a conversation I had with a colleague, a white male colleague, in regards to this panel, and sharing some of the reasons behind the panel and some of the challenges. And he said, so far you've told me something that everybody goes through. Everybody has these challenges. So I guess my question to you all is, what, if anything, does race and gender, the combination of those two, have to do with your leadership journey? Like, how has race and gender, if at all, impacted your leadership journey? Because some people will look at you and say, well, clearly they weren't hindered, they're here, they've made it. They're going places. So what does race and gender have to do with it?
What doesn't it?
I know. I think so. Besides saying everything, right? So I think one of the key things I heard, hearing our forever First Lady speaking, right, is this notion that, and I can personalize this for me. So in behaviors I demonstrate, that if somebody else, if a white woman would demonstrate, would be seen as leadership. For me, I would get feedback about being bossy or controlling or not getting along with others. And this is like feedback even from childhood, right? So I remember as a child in District 6 recognizing, okay, I gotta like switch this up, right? Because I don't want to get in trouble, like Caribbean family. I need to, get home, the notes, right? Like, I gotta figure this out, right? And I recognize that being quiet and being polite and smiling a lot, and being sweet, like, got me really far. And not to say that I wasn't those things, I genuinely felt those things, but I didn't ask the questions that I had every time. I didn't, if we were trying to do some kind of activity in school and class, in a group situation, I would fall back, let the really confusing, like not clear plan form, and be like, I'm not gonna be the one, right? So it took, I had to decondition myself of that, and I don't know your colleagues, right? And I can't say what the experience is for others, but I think as a Black girl and a Black person that presents as a woman, you're given very specific feedback of how you need to show up. That is actually conditions you away from leadership. And you have to really unpack that for yourself. So if I've had to, and I still, to this very day, in thinking about my interactions when I'm in a team setting, my interactions at work, my interactions in the grocery store, of just thinking about how am I showing up, and am I showing up as how I really want to, right? Or am I showing up in a way that I've been conditioned is acceptable? And I don't know how much airtime, like how much time other people spend thinking that. So I think it is very common for someone to say my experience is the norm. Right? Why would you need this very specific panel? I hope your colleagues here. I hope you learn something. Because this starts from, we all have things to do. But this starts from, like the moment a child's born, right? We both have daughters, and the way people condition baby girls of being sweet and play nice and don't make a fuss, and the way we condition our boys. It's just this programming starts from jump. So I think the reason I'm sitting in this panel now is because of my deconditioning of myself. And it's been an active and a rigorous process. And I don't know, and I can only speak from my experience, but I don't know how often others have to do a similar process.
One of the things that I recognized from an early age was that if you're confident and competent, you're seen in a certain way. Like you said, boys are conditioned to be confident, and or to be seen as a leader and confident to speak out. And I learned very early that it was more about, well, what do you know? Or, well, how do you know? So I learned early that I was questioned more. So I learned how to be behind the scenes. So in the deconditioning, it was sort of stepping into my leadership role and rejecting having to do it behind the scenes. And it's still a work in progress. I just find that for me, one of the things that we face, or that I face, is, in front of my face, is that I've gotten feedback that because I'm so serious, and because when I'm focused on what I'm doing, it reads as either angry, or it reads as, I was told that I didn't get a job because the person who I was interviewing, or the person that interviewed alongside of me, not with me, but was that there was more compassion and warmth from this other candidate, which I think I'm a pretty warm and fuzzy person. I spent a lot of time smiling. Obviously I didn't smile enough, or I didn't smile right. But that is something that I think I tend to think about a lot, is when I go into spaces that are predominantly white or predominantly male. Because as a production manager, I was in a predominantly white male business. I had to think about, okay, so do I look buttoned up? Am I too much of that? Am I not enough of this? So it is a lot of thought that goes into how you show up. So my work spoke for me. And that was something that I spent a lot of time being very, very clear about, that, yeah, I have this, so where's the problem and what's the question? Next. So.
So for me, race and gender showed up very differently. And I go back to my experiences in District 26 and attending schools where the expectation was that of my white and Asian peers. You perform academically. It was very clear in my household. My parents' job was to provide a roof over our heads, and our job was to go to school and to get good grades. And I remember that year where we didn't get good grades and didn't have a good Christmas. So we were always being held accountable. But my parents were very clear about, you speak up, let your voice be heard. I've had experiences from my peers of color where I've been asked, why are you so vocal? Why are you so comfortable around white people? You know, we have our place, watch what you say. I don't know that life. If I have a question, no matter what you look like, I'm going to be respectful and I'm going to ask that question. So I'm very cognizant of it, and when I feel like race and gender is negatively impacting the situation, I choose to remove myself from that situation. And I'll just give you a quick example. Voting in New Orleans a couple of weeks ago, and I was in line and two white women came in. I would say they were in their mid to late 50s, and they said, you know, we're in a rush. Do you mind? And I said, I'm from the North, and New York in specific, right? And I said, well, if you're in a rush, you need to rush to the end of the line, because I'm online. And so what I found interesting about that experience was there was a white man behind me, and they didn't ask him to, they didn't even ask me, they just jumped in front of me, assumed. So the white man behind me, they didn't ask. There was a black woman behind him, and they said, we're in a rush. And she said, okay. And so race and gender, I question it. I push back on it when I see that it is having a negative impact. And it's because I don't know any different. Like, I don't know that I should be being a certain way. And I wouldn't, because I wouldn't be authentically myself.
It makes me think about the different people that I've been supervised by, and I've been supervised in my two previous positions in education by a white woman and a white male. And I remember what I would call nitpicking on things that were distraction from the work that I was actually there to do. And so I remember when I worked in District 79, and my boss would say these weird things like, you say room wrong. I'm like, well, I'm from Philly, so we don't pronounce, we don't enunciate in Philadelphia. So, and we don't. And so I was like, okay, so I don't say room. I know how to spell it, R-O-O-M, and I know what a room is. But it was to distract from some of the other work that I wanted to get done. And so when I later dug into it, I found that there was a distraction because I was being shifted from her team to another team because of some work that I was doing. And so instead of her being upset with whomever made that decision, her way of getting back at me was to nitpick on things about my speech. And I was like, well, I have a bachelor's, I have a master's, I go to Bank Street right now, so I think I'm pretty okay, right? And it really didn't matter what I was saying. It was just about, I just have to find some way to understand why is it that they want to move her from my team to another team that's actually getting a lot of work done, which actually a better decision for me. But I guess that was the piece. The other piece is when I think about when I was supervised by a white male who, again, not to say the distraction, but there was a morale problem that was in the school. And it always became, it's not you, Ms. Johnson, it's him. And I would always play this role of like, well, let's just kind of see how we can, get together, get along together so it's not, but I always feel like whenever I had conversations with him, I would feel like that angry black woman. I just wanted to understand, why is it that the teachers say they want to work more with students, that we just allow them to work more with students? What's the problem? Because the contract says. And I'm like, okay, but yes, the contract says that, but what else could we do besides look deeper at the contract issue? There are teachers saying, I'm willing to spend time with students to help them out. Why is that an issue? Now, I don't understand, as someone who's being supervised by him is saying, well, you know what? This is your role. Your role is to do what I say. And so I was also like, well, probably also I'm not going to be here for too long, but because I need to have a voice. And when I am the type of person that always needs feedback. I don't want anyone to ever, and anyone who's ever worked with me in the past or personally, my friends, they know, don't ever sugarcoat it for me, ever. If I say or do something wrong, I need to know so I'm not continuously making that mistake. And I could not get that from him. And I said, I can't grow here as a black woman under a white male who refuses to give me that hard, critical feedback that I need, that's going to propel me to success. I'm stuck here. I'm going to always be only what you want me to be because I can't grow under someone who's not willing to tell me what I need to do to improve. And so my journey from race to gender, I question now that there is a white woman that is the principal of the school. I was actually the principal and have a lot of power, but now speaking to people who are there, they're like, she runs the whole school. And I'm like, that's interesting how she ran the whole school, because I couldn't even run the secretary, literally couldn't ask the lady to make me a copy. So, but it's interesting with how race and gender plays in your leadership journey, and even those people who are above you or supervises you in your work.
The only thing I would add, and this is mainly for those aspirational leaders in the audience, when I heard that comment, I thought to myself, who is he to judge your experience and what you think about it? And that to me is the issue, that oftentimes people who operate from a place or space of privilege or a place or space of comfort feel okay with critiquing what you experience and or saying, well, really, you shouldn't do that, and you should do this. So as you said, you know what I mean, trying to determine what you should do and who you should be. And when you come to realize who you are through self-actualization, you realize that all of these different attributes that got us where we were, operating from a deficit model is not the approach. You want to operate from a strength-based model and use all of these same vivid words that people use to describe you as assertive, whatever it is. Use that to your advantage, because that's why you got to where you are. So ultimately, don't let others define who you are, who you need to be, how you need to show up. Determine who you are and how you want that to look and how you want that to manifest in your own life. And that's something that you will grapple with potentially as a leader. But once you get to that point of self-actualization, you're unstoppable. And comments like that will not have you jarred, but have you feeling and wondering like, wow, I really hope that someday you have the opportunity to feel open and know who you are in the same way. So that you're not going to judge everybody else.
Equity of the mic. And thank you so much for those powerful words. And I think what Mieja's last comment kind of leads into this whole question of the how. So, we just heard some of the concrete examples of some of the challenges that are faced by Black women in leadership: assumptions, invisibility, preconceived notions, stereotypes, microaggressions, things of that nature, some of which are familiar to many people in the audience, yet again, you were here. We also heard about this whole concept in terms of how you're you've gotten there and how you're maintaining, having to do with self-actualization. You all seem to have a very clear sense of self, but at the same time, I think it was Tracy that mentioned, the village. So I guess the question that I have is, in terms of like how you do it, the how, some of those success strategies, is it a matter of nature or nurture? So in other words, is it something that you're kind of born with, that you have to have inside you that makes you a successful leader, or how much of that has to do with the environment, particularly, and I'll add this to the discussion as well, particularly our institutions, because some of you mentioned also some of your leadership programs, Bank Street, everybody here of course is a Bank Street grad, at least two of us have our leadership degrees from TC. So what factor in terms of your success or the strategies has to do with things that are innate and have to do with the environment, have to do with institutions, the places that you work now, your community, things of that nature?
I think for me it was probably nurture. I was raised by my father in North Philadelphia. I didn't have a black or white woman that sort of patted me on my back or encouraged me to do anything realistically. I could only account for one time when I was in high school and I wasn't doing so well in algebra. And I remember my teacher, who was a white woman, who asked me, "What do you do after school?" I said, I work at Burger King. And she said, "What time do you have to be to work?" I said, 4. She said, "Well, we have an hour every day that we can spend after school until you get this algebra right." And luckily, she was a really powerful woman who stayed with me every day, because I was one of the kids who would sit. My school was not a great school. It was like a school of probably 4,000 or 5,000 students, right across the street from a precinct in Germantown, if any of you are familiar with Philadelphia. Germantown High School that no longer exists. And in the school, she could have let me fail. She could have literally sat there and watched me fail every single semester as a 9th grader. And once you have a bad start in 9th grade, it's all downhill the hill from there. And she sat with me and she helped me with my algebra, because I refused to ask for help in the class because I didn't want anybody else to know that I had no idea what was going on. Until I did. I ended up passing algebra and got the support from her. But it was my upbringing, I think, from my father raising me and eventually marrying someone who had been in my life since I was 10 years old, and what I call my mother. But I didn't have a great start. I grew up in poverty. I lived in shelters. I was homeless. My biological mother has always been a drug addict, and I used that as a reason to not want to be like her, and a reason to want to work with kids that were like me, that I can give an opportunity to. So, can you snap that? But I think that's where the nurturing came in, for having a father who was like, "Absolutely not. Get your butt up. You're going to, no, you're not sick here. No, you're good. Go to school." And I would be there all day until the nurse came and got me, put her back in class. I'm not getting her. And so he pushed me. He still pushes me till this day. He tells me to write a book. He'll be 60 years old next year. And I don't think that I would have been anything if I had not been for having a strong black man who said, "You're going to be better than me. You're going to be better than all of us. And I believe in you, and you can do better than all of us, and you will." And that's what makes me want to really work with children who are just like me.
So I would like to believe that it was nature, but it so wasn't. It was definitely nurture. And you asked, how did that work, Rabin? And I would say I'm very purposeful about who I spend my time with. And I have always been. And so who's in my circle? I don't want a lot of people who are going to say, "Yes, you're doing this right," when I'm actually doing it wrong. I want people who are going to give me critical feedback, as Asia mentioned. And that's how I grow, and we do that for each other. So I'm very intentional about who I spend time with, and have been that way since a child. Small group of friends, and we hold each other accountable. So when I think about the nurturing piece, my parents for sure. I remember, so I changed my major 3 times. I was going to be a pharmacist. I was going to be a psychologist. And then I received a degree in communications. And when I did not finish pharmacy school, it was my mother who said, "Oh, you're getting that degree. I don't know what it's going to be in, but you're getting a degree." And so here I am 3 degrees later, and it's because she kept pushing me. And when I think about a pattern, she never let me give up. And so she always wanted my brother and I involved in after-school activities. So for me, it was swimming. That didn't work. Then it was piano lessons. I got hit on the knuckles all the time. That didn't work. And then it was dance. And that's what struck a chord. And I was in it for almost 20 years. And it helped me thrive. And so part of my leadership development came from dancing. It also came from my mother, my aunt, my godmother, my friends saying, "Don't give up." And I still have that spirit and that energy today. And I would say the women on this panel, I know I feel like I'm accountable for those coming after me. And so I'm in town for the weekend from New Orleans. And I am a part of a young women's Black support group. Some of you guys are in the audience. And it's part of that village like we are responsible for each other. And that sounds great. Maybe that's a career path you should think about, but we support each other and we're very transparent about that.
At the risk of sounding like skirting the middle, I would say for me it's a combination of both. In the nurturing, I know that as a child, my mom didn't go to college until she was in her 60s, and she got an associate's degree. And then she got a master's in Central and Eastern European Studies. And then she got another master's when she was 70 in clinical psychology. So, I grew up as a first-generation college student. My sister and I were the first in our family to go to college in our generation. And, my mom's folks didn't go, and her folks didn't go. But I can't ever remember not knowing that I was going to go to college. I always knew I was going to go to college. And it was not ever a question, and it just was. So whatever my mom did, it was internal to her, because years and years later, it was so important that she took the time to do that for herself. So in that sense, yes, that was like totally nurtured in me. My sister also, all kinds of degrees. She's a nurse, she's an artist, she utilizes both of those skills where she is now in England. She makes quilts. So, and she's a nurse. I don't understand how she does that. But, and then as far as nature, I think there were those in my life who recognized that I had skills and I had leadership qualities, and they really understood that and made it clear to me that yes, you are. It was always that that encouragement. It was the sort of feeding that fire that sometimes I didn't know that I had. So I think it is a combination, for me, as a combination of both, which is why I'm here.
So sometimes you might have a natural proclivity to doing something really, really well, but I just wanted to offer a few concrete strategies as well, just to kind of bullet them. The first I would share is really stay anchored in your why. I remember very distinctly I had a student who was a Black young girl. She was suicidal. She had a lot of suicidal tendencies. a very difficult story, and her mom came to me and she said, oh, Miss Edwards, I was Miss Harris at the time. She said, Miss Harris, she said, I'm so grateful for you that you're a leader. And she said, because Joie was her name, Joie sees herself in you. And that's always stayed with me. And regardless of when things got difficult, I always thought about Joie and really staying anchored in my why, going back to what I shared earlier about the racial disparities. The second piece I wanted to offer is stay attuned to implicit bias and understand what that means for you in each role that you have. And also, within that, being okay with understanding that others' perception of you might not always match your reality. And be thinking about what work, if any, you would want to do around that. And then the last thing I wanted to share is always go through your own personal evolution. And I would say you can just do that organically and authentically through reflection. Know that you are malleable, you're not a fixed person. Like, I hope that who I am today is not going to be the same person 5 years from now. I'm certainly not the same person who I was 10 years ago. My parents can attest to that. But for sure, just really understanding that you can become and shape who you want to be at every stage in your life. In your professional life, in your role, in your personal life, as a mother, as a wife, as an educator. And that's really, really important because I think sometimes you work so hard to cultivate and create this person who you would like to be. And then life happens and you have situations, right, and moments, and you're kind of like, whoa, I didn't anticipate that, but then you feel ill-equipped because that might not have been in your toolkit in terms of how to deal with it. But just know that each adversity and whatever perseverance you have to go through is only there to take you to the next level. It's a test so you have your testimony. So really staying anchored in those three things is really, really key to your, it can be key to your success ultimately.
Very quickly, I mean, I agree with everything that everyone shared. And, I'm also here selfishly to learn from what everyone is sharing. But I just want to question, the question is a little problematic for me, right? Because this notion of, like, is it nature, is it nurture? It's like we are conditioned to see people a certain way, right? And for that person who may be like an amazing leader, but they're just not showing up in the way that we're seeing, right? They're saying room in a way. Don't come at me telling me I'm saying room the wrong way. You know what I meant, right? A room. Like, don't do that, right? Like, so, but I think when I think back to myself and my development, something that really couldn't be taken away from me is I knew I was a loved person, right? So my parents came here from the Dominican Republic, like, it just made it happen, right? Oh, what? I know the way that I showed up to my teachers, just like a regular girl, was not, I'm sure, what they thought was college material. I didn't realize I would go to college. I knew I had to do something. I knew I didn't want to stay in my house. I knew I didn't really want to work. Right? I knew I had to do something. Because, you know, you couldn't be in the home without working. So, and I was like, well, let's see, where can I go where I don't have to pay anything, right? Because my mom kept saying we don't have any money. That was like our college conversation. So those are not the, and that was kind of it, right? Like, that's not the makings of like a success story, right? So then I had to take that energy, go into my guidance counselor, who was like overwhelmed and underpaid, I'm sure. And like that wasn't a very fulfilling conversation. I just applied to wherever I could, right? But I think in this notion, then when I became a principal, and I think for me the best thing I ever did in my life was to become a principal, right, in the school where I was a principal. Because then I was able to look around and be like, yo, you can do things, and you can do things, and you come over here, let's talk about that. And there were so many teachers that had never thought that they can do something else, right? They thought this was it. I was like, no, there's more, let's talk about this. And then there were folks who just walked in the door thinking they were going to be the next assistant principal. And I was like, no. Right? Let's talk about why no, why you're not. And so in those moments, right, so when people like question me or like, oh, did you actually meet? Nah, I said what I meant. I said what I said. That's what I meant. I said how I wanted to say it. Why are you jumping on my word choice, right? And just to share a very specific example, and like you show up in ways that you cannot control how people are perceiving you, right? But you can definitely control if you're gonna say something about it. And I encourage you to say something about it, right? So I was in a co-led model. Our school was a shared leadership model. And there was a time, it's so funny, it's always about like not work. So that I think I was getting married, I was about to get, not married, and I think I was talking about honeymoon. And it was not my conversation, because I'm not one to bring up my business in like a work conversation. Someone mentioned it, someone brought it up. And I was just like, why? We're not talking about like what I'm choosing to do in my vacation. And another person on this leadership team said, well, I'm sure, so I had said like, this is not a conversation. We need to talk about the schedule, we need to talk about whatever it is. We have agenda items. But this person continued. It was like, well, I'm sure you'll get whatever you want for your honeymoon. I'm sure you'll make that happen. But not in the way that was like, yes, girl, yes, queen, you can do it. And I was like, okay, so we have agenda items, we have to get through this. But you're saying something to me, and I would like to engage. So I was like, tell me what you mean by that, right? What do you mean I'm going to get what I want, right? It was like, well, you have that personality, where I'm sure if your husband wants A, but you want B, you're going to get B. And I was like, well, don't you think you know me, right? So I chose to take that moment for public learning, right? This is a public conversation. You brought it to me, I'll bring it to you back. And I was like, it sounds like you're making some assumptions. Please tell me a little bit more about where do I show up? Do you think I get whatever I want, right? It's like, oh no, you know, it's like wives and honeymoons. I was like, no. You made a comment about me, right? Not about women in general, not about honey. So, but I had to bring it back to, we are in this shared leadership model. Clearly you have assumptions about how I show up. And you're not talking about that, right? You're choosing to bring up my honeymoon, right? As a way. So I was like, I encourage you to come talk to me. Perhaps you're feeling like I'm getting whatever I want, maybe, in this work situation. Or you think this was a joke and I'm not going to take it seriously, but there's seriousness in everything. But it was just one of those moments that even, and that was after the bachelor's, master's, doctorate, that was after I founded the school, that was after all of that, right? There's still people questioning me. Are you getting the things, right? Am I getting these results because I'm smart, or because I can design a great plan, or because I can use my relationship to move somebody forward, or because I just get what I want, right? Like, and when you're talking to an immigrant girl from Washington Heights, I don't get what I want, right? Like my whole life. But like literally, like in my home, but to see my parents, right? My parents were educated people, come to this country and be treated like they're nothing, right? Because they can't speak English. Having to translate open school conversations when I'm 10, and hearing my teacher say things that were problematic. And I was like, I'm not translating that. One, I recognize that you don't respect my parent for who they are. Right. You don't value what they're bringing. You're talking to them like a child. I'm not gonna, like, this is not a good conversation, right? Like, you're not gonna demean my parent in front of me, right? So that experience, everything is learning and everything is an opportunity to shift, right? So I will always show up however I show up for people, right? If you think I'm too much, I will always be too much. But I'm gonna call you on those moments when you're trying to create my story for me, because I'm not gonna let you do that. But we also do that for people in our own lives, right? So I could take that same energy and do that to the teachers in front of me. But I pushed myself to at least try to get to know them, right, in the best way that I could. And there were folks that I thought had leadership potential, and they didn't want it. They're like, no. I like to leave at this time. I like to get here when I get here. Fine, but I can explore that. But then it was that feeling that I can't have someone walking in my school building, dealing with my students, thinking that they are like a leader, right, and they're like delivering the message, when they're not, right? They're doing it in a way that's harmful to children, that is reinforcing that notion that my students weren't enough, how they were showing up. So then I have to call you out on that. And I think now in my new role, that's kind of a major part of what I do, is I bring in these conversations that people don't want to have, right? They've never wanted to have them, and that's all I wanted to do was have them. Because I recognize as a young person in the system how painful it was to see your teacher's face and know, you don't think I'm going to do anything. I can see it in your face. You're not that excited that I'm even here. So I guess I'll be excited for myself, right? But then, you know, at the high school level, and I think it's different. I don't know if it's different. It might be exactly the same. When you're 17, 18, 19, 20, if you recognize that your teacher doesn't believe in you, it's just that extra push out that door, right? And you already have society telling you don't need this, you don't need it, right? Like, continue. So I think in this conversation what's resonating for me is not just the conversations we have with ourselves or with our circle, but what's a conversation that we are having with others? Like, are we lifting people up? and helping them see the potential they have, and telling people that, no, you actually don't have that potential yet, and I can help you with that if you want my help? Or are we like, you know, either embarrassed by the conversation or uncomfortable and choosing not to do it? And I always encourage folks to do the awkward thing and like have that conversation, because ultimately that person is going to be facing one of your students and you want them to be better prepared.
Oh, okay. And I want to move into some audience questions. I have some here. We won't be able to get to all of them, but also we're going to do a combo of actually having the microphone as well for you to add some of your questions to the conversation and interact with our panelists before we get into the networking. But I just want to crystallize some of those concrete strategies that we heard today in different forms. And some of this really aligns with some of the research that was done by my colleague and I before. But, you know, we talk about mentorship, and if you don't have mentors, seeking those out. That was some things we heard today. The whole idea of the village, you know, building that network. If it's not in your organization, going out and finding another organization in order to do that. Also being mission driven and always thinking about that particular mission. Thinking about your goal and your focus and who you're actually here for. And also turning these awkward situations or microaggressions into basically teachable moments or opportunities to have critical conversations. And I know that sometimes as people of color, a lot of times we do feel put upon to always be the educator, the teacher, the one to take the higher ground and to, okay, this person is coming at me this way, let me in a calm and civil way address this. But it sounds to me like what's being said though is that it's not so much just for that other person, but it does something for you too, in terms of, like as Michelle Obama said, keeping your own sanity. So thank you so much for giving those concrete suggestions. By the way, I was remiss to mention the hashtags that we have. The hashtags that we have, please do not feel that you cannot be on your phone. Please be on your phone. And whether it's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever social media you use, we have 3 hashtags. BASCA Women Lead, or BSCA Women Lead. We also have Black Women Lead, which is a very big conversation on social media right now, especially with our recent election and the women's wave, and particularly the amount of people of color that have come into Congress. And also BFLV, which stands for that term that you might have noticed at the end of the slide. My colleague and I, we were thinking about the fact that, you know, there isn't really in the research a term for Black women that are kind of unbothered or able to deal with some of these issues constructively. And so we came up with Black Female Leadership Verisimilitude, so BFLV for short. So please do feel free to tweet, go on social media with these hashtags to bring other people into the conversation. But continuing along the line of concrete strategies, one audience member writes, in your work advocating for educational equity, how do you find a balance between giving it your all and not burning out? And, okay. And this is a question that I even had as well, because it seems to me, and you can say whether or not you feel this is true, that as Black women leaders, sometimes there's a lot of pressure for you to give back, a lot of pressure for you to address issues that are institutional, like, you know, you're a leader in one particular setting, but how are you going to address segregation? You're a leader in one setting, but how are you going to address this disproportionate number of students being suspended? Things that are probably much larger than your role. So how do you, how in your work advocating for educational equity, what strategies do you have, concrete strategies for balancing between giving it your all and not burning out?
How much time do we have for this?
Not much time.
I did say I moved to New Orleans, right? So that was part of me being, again, purposeful, but having experienced burnout and working 7 days a week and not having time for my family and my friends, and spending way too much time watching reality TV because I just needed to be numb and not use any brain cells because I was burnt out. So in terms of strategy, boundaries. People will treat you the way you allow them to treat you, and that's very big, right? But that could mean after 7 o'clock, I'm not going to respond to emails. That could mean on the weekends, I'm not going to respond to emails. And having that conversation. So I'm very clear with my team now. I may send an email, guys, please know, I don't expect you to respond to it. Now, as a leader, I also have to be mindful that if I'm seeing that my team is responding to it, then, because I know what that burnout feeling feels like, then you know what? I can hold off until Monday morning. I can put them in my draft folder and then send them out on Monday. Reflection, and anyone who has graduated from Bank Street, we reflect a lot, right? We reflect, I reflect all the time, and so I'm very big on not repeating the same things over and over again and expecting, or the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And so I have to be mindful of, okay, I noticed in my last position, I burnt out, and these were the reasons why. A very clear example. I'd come home and my partner would say, oh, you're not talking about such and such school today. What happened? Because that became a part of the dialogue. Every time I came home, I had not tuned out, I had not put work here. That was a part of dinner conversation, everything. And when I moved to New Orleans, and I mentioned one of our schools, and I stopped myself. I said, no, I'm not going, I need that break. And so I would also say being disciplined. And so boundaries, creating boundaries for yourself and for the people that you work with, being disciplined. And also, I would say be flexible.
So I would say in addition to the B's you mentioned, balance and burnout, I have 4 B's that I wanted to share. So the first was boundaries, so I kind of like echo that and agree there, so I want to elaborate. The second one is really have bucket fillers. That's really important. And so what that means is find things that you really enjoy that help replenish you. So whether that's meditation, you know, whatever it is, it's really, really key. Conversations, strolls, date nights, whatever it is, because you have to keep your bucket full. For me, it's spending time with my 17-month-old daughter. So have those bucket fillers, because that's really, really important. The third thing I would say is, as a woman of faith, blessings, for me, is a huge one. So, you know, oftentimes when I go to service, it's refilling, you know, offering prayers, meditating on the word, whatever it is, like that's a key piece for me. So I share that as mine, but you'd have to seek out, of course, and find yours, however that manifests itself. And the last thing I would say is bravery. And what I mean by that is, the sister at the end, she spoke about being able to create those boundaries. So when I say bravery, I mean sometimes you just have to say no. You know, like I can't do that. And the way that you determine whether or not you choose to take something on as a leader, because essentially you're at the helm, right? So everything becomes your responsibility. And everybody's challenge is immediate for you, and they want you to do something about it, something with it, or collaborate around what to do with it. So I would just say you have to determine when you'll say no by maintaining your focus. And my superintendent now, she always says, if it's not about teaching and learning, I don't want to talk about it. If it's not about teaching and learning, I don't want to talk about it. And it's so key. And she says that at least 5 to 10 times a day, because people oftentimes want to posit or talk about things that are really not anchored in teaching and learning. Hence some of our data across some of our schools. So I would just say focus on your priorities, maintain your focus so that you really, really stay anchored in your purpose and being brave. So those 4 pieces.
I think it's also important, yes, to everything 100%. And also for me, it's important to find ways of finding spaces for myself during the work day, right? Like, I can't wait till like 5 o'clock and I have this thing, or when I get to my daughter, like, I need it now, right? And I realized a few years ago, like, it doesn't matter really where we work, like, unless you're like in a space where you've hired every single person and there's like an office of like 8 people. But we can, as a Black woman, as an Afro-Latina, we're often enmeshed in a culture that I don't care about. I don't know nothing about that, right? So do we like Game of Thrones? I'm not talking about that. Like, I don't watch that. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, these cultural things become a thing, and all of a sudden, if you're not watching it, if you're not talking about it, like, you're not in the like relaxed space, right? It's like, I need to relax too. So I made a commitment to just say what I want to say when I want to say it, obviously like in an appropriate way. But if I want to talk about Cardi B, I'm going to talk about Cardi B. And if you don't know who that is, I will bring up a video and I will, this is important. Like, this is content. The kids are talking about it. She's saying important things. But that for me is a moment where I'm going to like relax and laugh and like connect. And I'm going to stop breaking my back to try to understand your culture and what you think is cool and like be so sweet and pleasant. Like, I'm done with that. It's exhausting. And like, we're in a conversation, like, I'll listen to you, you listen to me, we learn. But oftentimes I found myself like really trying hard to be like a great like dinner party guest at work. I was like, I'm here all day. I'm here for many hours. So I would like to say something that I find is funny. Perhaps you won't. But that's fine, right? But I think those cultures can become dominant and toxic. So whether it's like NFL season, that's all everybody's talking about, I don't watch that, right? Before it was because of my, like, I just thought it was boring. Now it's for political reasons. And now I'm like fancy. But like, I'm not doing that, right? So what else? So inserting myself and inserting my culture and inserting what I think is important has become a way of like, creating a moment of zen during the workday, and it can be the most stressful. And it also puts people on my side of it. You're uncomfortable by what I just said. You feel confused because you don't know what I'm talking about. Well, welcome, right? This happens often. Sometimes there's an expectation for Black and brown people to learn others' culture, like as well as our own, and it's not reciprocated. And that's unfair. That's unfair. So I think in whatever little ways that I can like push my alternative agenda, I will. Obviously, like in an appropriate way. I'm not gonna hurt people's feelings or play something that has like inappropriate language. But if these are the things that I'm talking about, and I would find students, and we would talk about it, like, well, other people should know about these things, and making those references. And then for folks who are confused, like inviting them then to like, let's talk about it. But I think the power of culture and your work culture can be, it can be intense, and we sometimes are not in charge of it. Right? We don't control the culture at work. So finding those ways to be yourself, like throughout the day, is so important for me.
Just to add a little bit to that, all of this. Connections. Because I feel like it is essential to maintaining your sanity, not burning out, to have a crew. Right? You need a crew. And we've talked about it in having mentors and being mentors, and each one reaching one and teaching one and leading one and bringing one. But you need the people in your circle to, just for those moments where somebody's done something, to be able to be able to just close the door, and whether that's somebody that's on the phone, or that's somebody with a text, or that's somebody that you walk by and you grab by, you gotta come in here. That is essential for survival. And that is essential to keep you from burning out, because if you don't have that opportunity to just say what needs to be said in the way that you need to say it without the filter, to take that breath and then come back and say it in the way that will not get you fired. So that, I think, is also important in sort of maintaining your ability to keep doing the hard work without burning out.
We have, I think, time. Do we have time for 2? Okay, so time goes fast, right? When things are powerful, right? But powerful and impactful. I would like to say, I definitely feel so. I hope you do as well.
If your question written down wasn't answered or presented to the audience, please do put it in the hashtag. Put it on social media so people know the questions that are going on here, because we also want institutions like Bank Street to have more opportunities and more forums like this. You know, it shouldn't be a one-time thing. So let everybody know what's going on here. But I think we have time for one question from the audience, at least one. Does somebody have a question, either that you wrote down or that you didn't get a chance to write? We have a microphone right here from the lovely Linda of our Alumni Association. Yes.
I don't think I need a microphone.
Can you tell us your name?
My name is Frank Harrison. That's my daughter.
Oh.
Someone said to me, this group of young people is a wash. There's no help for them. I say, this is my question, is that person right or is that person wrong? And if they are wrong, then convince me that these children got a chance. And someone said to me that this group is a wrap. They finished. So I want everybody to hear me clearly. Convince me that this brother's not correct.
It's hard to follow that up, but want to take that on briefly?
I want Aisha to take it
on. Okay. Aisha. All right.
And she got it right. That's right. I mean, like I said, I worked on Rikers, and I've seen a lot of kids. I actually ended up running into students who I was in another school with. Was like, how'd you get here? One kid told me that I left. That was the reason why. I'm not that special. But for me, I also have a 16-year-old son, so I also understand. But kids are not a wash because, look at me. What if that teacher, what if that math teacher never saw something in me? She could have let me fail. What about all of the teachers that sit in a lot of schools nowadays and see kids? I know my school, I have some people here from my school all the way up in the back. That's my school. They're the type of people that we probably violate all of the UFT DOE rules. They have, so I'm not going to tell we didn't do it. I'm like, the children have our personal cell phone numbers, right? We have their personal cell phone numbers. We call them in the morning. We buy them breakfast. We have physically picked up kids and have taken them to our school to make sure that they understand that we care. We take them to doctor's appointments. We buy them clothes. We spend money on them. I mean, it is a commitment that you have, and it's a responsibility as a school leader. One thing that we always require, our first question is, why do you want to teach in the South Bronx? And the minute someone said, which they did this summer, which was, I get extra money on my master's degree to teach in the South Bronx, I said, lady, bye. Bye, lady. Be going with your foolishness. But you have to be committed to serving children that live in an impoverished neighborhood. In the Bronx, 42% of the children live in poverty. 42%. And out of those 42%, most people probably know this, but the Bronx is ranked number 1 for poverty in the state of New York. So the level of support and intellect, you just have to be a different person to work in the Bronx. You do. And you have to have a different commitment to serving the children. You can't come there saying, I'm just here, and I tell teachers very clearly, if you come here saying, I'm only here to teach English and only English, so help me God, you're in the wrong school. Because you come here, you're going to be a mentor, you're going to be an advisor, you're going to touch a kid, you're going to hug a kid. A kid is going to wipe their nose on your shirt. They are going to cry to you in high school, right? Because they're still babies, and we remind them all the time, you're 18, but when you go to the doctor, Winnie the Pooh is still on the wall. So until then, we are responsible responsible for really making sure that we're committed to serving these children. When they say children are our future, people don't realize that if we don't start serving this generation well, these are the kids who are responsible for our taxes, who will be our government, who will our Social Security or change our tires, do all of these things. If we don't invest in them, then who are we investing in? If we talk about minorities, but the minorities are no longer minorities in this country. If you look at the data, it shows you that the majority, especially in New York City, the public school system, the majority of the students in the New York City public school system of children are of color. Who are we serving here, right? And most of those teachers don't look like us. And so they don't think about us, right? And I agree with the panelists in terms of, especially with Cardi B, because that was an opening introduction last school year. By some principal that I know. But it shows my commitment to understanding what goes on in our culture. And if you're not culturally aware and responsive to the needs of the community, you absolutely cannot serve them well. I hope that.
With bringing you back to what we all are here for, which are the children. If you see something brilliant and beautiful on this panel, it's because each of these women, whether they are traditional public, independent schools, charter, forget all that difference, they're all about the mission, they're all about the children, and that's what drives them. And I think it was also so appropriate for an elder to bring us out, because we need to really support the next generation of leaders, you know? So as you into the networking space, please do enjoy the refreshments. Also get some business cards. I actually will have a sign-up sheet out there as well. I want to stay in contact with you. Please have part of your conversation be, what can I do or we do, or if you're part of an institution, to support and nurture leadership, right? In order for us to replicate what we have here. What can we do? As allies, whether you're people of color or not, what can we do to make this flourish and not just be something that's a one-time thing? And we talked about this 5 years ago when there were some great female leaders of color. What can we do? Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of the week. Oh, and thank you all so much. Thank you to Bank Street College. Let's give it up for Bank Street. Thank you. And thank you to Jim Clay, our president, for coming out as well. Thank you so much.